Today I won't be making an entertainment video, out of respect for the victims of the ongoing historic catastrophe and horror in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. Remember, everything you'll hear now is not fiction. This is but a taste of what's happening at this exact moment in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, according to my very eyes and the accounts of my sources, which are civilians, cops and authorities who are here in the most critically affected areas. So, it is my experience and my sources' experiences, for my freedom's sake. I don't claim it to be 100% correct, only that I believe it to be as correct as I'm able to present currently. Rio Grande do Sul, a heavily developed state in the extreme south of Brazil with high level of human development, which is a larger territory than the United Kingdom and comparable in size to the whole of Italy, historically home of Italian and German descendants, is going through a gigantic humanitarian crisis. There's a historic flood, never seen before, which is deeply affecting over 90% of the state. It's been called a despairing tragedy as never seen before, without precedents, and it may be getting much, much worse by the minute. A huge Madonna show in Brazil, which many are expressing, mainly through Twitter and WhatsApp, that was a satanic ritual for the deaths, marked the beginning of the disgrace. Globo News and other big media only gave any attention to the humanitarian chaos in the state after they were done partying, enjoying, and covering the show in Rio de Janeiro in its most minute details, which many Brazilians have expressed was a true horror show, with oral hex done on Granny Madonna on stage and transsexuals everywhere, if you know what I mean. A huge Navy ship was present in Rio, seemingly to offer defense during the said show, which seemed a little odd to many Brazilians. The Navy arrived just now in Rio Grande do Sul exactly 1 week after the beginning of the horror. Why they were in the Madonna show and were so delayed in helping the gauchos, people of Rio Grande do Sul, only the Brazilian Navy knows. Only in Canoas, a city around Porto Alegre, the state capital, there are hundreds of bodies floating, 1,000 to 2,000 bodies underwater. According to local police, it'll be an open-air cemetery once the water comes down. So, hundreds of dead bodies, including babies, were found floating. Only in one neighborhood of Canoas, the city that was hit the heaviest, there were around 300 bodies gathered and piled up by the rescuers, according to civilians. But the government-paid media insists there's 95 bodies overall in the whole state, which is as big as Italy, as stated prior. Pictures and videos with bodies are being heavily censored. The narrative is that it's disrespectful to the deceased and their families to spread these images. Many people have been helping the gauchos. Elon Musk is helping by donating 2,000 Starlink antennas and coverage. Gisele Bündchen, who was born in Rio Grande do Sul, is making touching videos on the matter. Luciano Hongui, a right-wing Brazilian billionaire, has helped with at least 10 helicopters, while the Brazilian army sent 2, which were said by the population to be mostly idle. Neymar Jr., the soccer player, sent 10 trucks filled with food and water as humanitarian aid and rented helicopters to help. Pablo Marçal, a right-wing billionaire businessman and influencer, sent a couple of helicopters and many trucks with tons of humanitarian aid as well. Many, countless others, are helping. The Brazilian Army, Navy, and Air Force sent 2 helicopters, some trucks to help, and perhaps some other things. According to the population, have been making some rather pathetic, desperate promotional videos, while they are never seen helping. Much on the contrary, videos abound of the armed forces idling about, running from work, and even lazily consuming resources that were intended for the victims. The population is livid, sending videos that purportedly show them we're doing nothing but getting in the way of the civilians who are doing all they can to save lives and help the victims. To be fair, personally, I have seen the army helping empty a private hospital here, the Hospital Mãe de Deus, or Mother of God. But I was left with the impression that their help should have been extended to the civilians around. That was the only time during this chaos I've seen the armed forces doing some good. I expected so much more. The Lula government has been calling the rescuers and victims' videos, as well as their opinions, fake news, even changing the narrative and official facts with some frequency. Civilians are being criminalized by the government for helping, saving people, and being persecuted for so-called fake news by showing the horrifyingly desolated situation on social media, which the government appears to want to keep unknown. Since the beginning, the government has also been prohibiting civilians from using their own boats, speedboats, and jet skis to save stranded victims. Even so, the people, in broad disobedience, entered the waters and saved thousands of people, and remain active until now. The population is claiming that the prohibition certainly led to the death of many hundreds or thousands of civilians who could have been saved. State and federal government punished civilians and companies that brought water and supplies, sending back tons of donations. Another strange example, without any reasonable explanation, humanitarian aid from Uruguay and Portugal was rejected by the Lula government. This, while the Lula government has given no funds so far to help, stating that the mayors of the affected state haven't asked for any money so far, which seems sincerely ludicrous and a cold attempt to trick the dying and suffering populace.
In the capital of the state, the local police were just given 60 new jet skis, but they refused, or were forbidden, to use them, as well as their older jet skis, for rescuing the civilians, because the water is dirty, which can lead to damage to the equipment. Meanwhile, hundreds of civilians used and are still using their privately owned jet skis to save lives, even against the orders of the Lula regime. Now, on the army, apart from serving as police to enforce government bans, people say the army had a completely negligible role in rescuing civilians. Among the excuses presented by the army for not engaging in the problem, they cited not being able to help because it's raining, the weather is bad. Civilians have been furiously asking if that is how they'll act in case of war, that if there's bad weather they won't be able to function, and are asking, why have they been paying so much tax money for the military to be so useless when they need it most? Actually, hashtags like civilian help civilian have been brought up in X to congratulate the people's great and successful efforts, and to jab the government and armed forces for their perceived hugely shameful failure to the authorities' aggressive annoyance, which have been making lists and even promised to arrest those who speak badly of the government or institutions. The population is totally livid with the government and the army, the latter of which, seemingly, enjoyed broad public support and admiration up until January of 2022, but has been now practically equal to the government in the level of public rejection and anger. The army has a high rejection percentage and generates strong feelings of rejection in most of the people of Brazil. To complicate matters, crime is seeing an unprecedented peak. Being completely out of control, criminals have, in fact, killed rescuers to steal boats, speedboats, and jet skis to use them to invade houses and buildings to steal. In various places in the capital, Porto Alegre, doors that require power to open ended up being left open to not keep residents trapped, and criminals were roaming freely inside these buildings, breaking into apartments and looking for women or children to sexually abuse. Indeed, various sexual abuses of women and especially children occurred in the victim shelters, where flood victims ended up being housed with criminals. In various stranded places, victims remain living on second floors of houses or in apartments, without light, water, or communication to defend their belongings, even though they are under serious risk of life. The population, heavily prohibited from carrying weapons by the government, is disobeying the laws in the name of survival, with the few who manage to keep firearms carrying them, revolvers, pistols, shotguns, and even rare rifles, with the local police apparently turning a blind eye in support of the desperate population, and disapproving of the illegal orders they received. As soon as the population began to respond, crime dropped sharply in various locations, and rescuers stopped being murdered. But security remains a very serious problem throughout the state, and criminals are especially dangerous and bold. It's impossible to go out at night and expect a minimum level of security throughout the state, but especially in densely populated areas still without light and water. It is essential to make trips, purchases, where available, and any outdoor activity exclusively during the day. The city exits are completely crowded with cars, with trips that would take from 20 to 30 minutes taking up to 6 to 8 hours, which would be inconceivable previously. Now, with a week of serious emergency, these trips are taking from 2 to 3 hours on average. Right and left-wing people, influencers, and organs are divided over the situation. Rio Grande do Sul, the Brazilian state, is comparable to the American state of Texas, for many reasons, including having the strongest gun culture in Brazil, cattle ranching, tends to right-wing conservative politics, etc. And many extreme left-wing influencers and civilians are expressing pleasure with the deaths generated in the state, even though their inhumane view is being blatantly rejected by the general population, both of the state and Brazilian, who are united for the good of Rio Grande do Sul as they have never been before. Also, people who tend to extreme left-wing politics tend to get emotional when pets and animals are saved, not caring about the life or death of people and even children. President Lula briefly visited the state. He showed a light mood to the press, and made comments about soccer that he felt were endearing. After that, he changed to an angry tone, and seeked to censor and punish those who are exposing the calamitous situation on social media, publicly getting upset with politicians who avoid him and run away from him at official ceremonies. It is understood that it is because they do not want to associate themselves with him, especially during this situation, which makes people feel very negatively about Lula, and especially persecuting anyone who says that those who are rescuing civilians are civilians in 95% of cases, which deeply irritates him and his team. Now, barely had the flood reached its likely halfway point. It's raining a lot as I'm reading this news to you. A hurricane was filmed by several people on the edges of the state. It's a unique event, since, historically, hurricanes have not been seen in this area. Some private researchers and influencers from all over Brazil have been gathering online to talk about the possibility of the state being the target of an attack by foreign or domestic entities, using advanced geoengineering weapons such as cloud seeding, HARP and other types of weather manipulating technologies. Remember that all that has been described is happening right at this second, deeply affecting the lives of millions of people right now, and having taken many lives in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. As stated prior, this is all solely my opinion, and must be checked for accuracy. It is as accurate as I can present it, given that I'm affected by this situation, and present in one of the most affected areas of all, but it does not constitute ultimate reality. Please comment, like, if you feel like it, and subscribe to hear more news on this ongoing historic catastrophe that we're all facing here in Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil.